What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing what we do every single year once the season has finished, and that is, well, basically embarrass myself by looking back at my Championship League table predictions to see which ones I got right and which ones I got badly wrong. Now, I've done 3 separate Championship League table predictions over the last season. I did one in pre-season before a ball was even kicked. I did one in the September international break, and the last one we did was in the November international break. And that's the one we're going to be looking at today, because I am not going back to review my July predictions at the very beginning for specific unknown reasons. And therefore, my Championship title winners are Luton Town. Anyway, so on one side of the screen you're going to see the league table prediction that I had back in November, and on the other side we are of course going to run through how it all finished and how far off I was in the end. So let's go from the bottom to the top, starting with the bottom 3. So starting at the bottom then, we have Cardiff City, who of course finished bottom of the Championship, and I was quite a way off with them, 5 positions off in the end, so maybe not that much. I did predict them to just about survive, but they did not only get relegated, they finished bottom of the Championship in what was, quite honestly, a disastrous season. I didn't think they would get relegated. I thought there might be a chance they'd get sucked in, they might flirt with it, they might drop in there once or twice, but they would pull themselves out in time before the end of the season, before the trapdoor shut, but they didn't. So Cardiff are another side that I think we expected to be down there, but maybe didn't expect to actually go down. Above them, we have Plymouth Argyle, who were the only one of the 3 sides who I predicted to go down who actually did. So although I wasn't quite right with their position, I did predict them to go down, and they were just off the bottom of the league in the end. I think the writing was on the wall for a long time for Plymouth, to be fair, especially when you appoint Wayne Rooney, let's be honest. But I thought Muslich did a brilliant job giving them a chance towards the end of the season, and maybe had he come in a bit earlier, maybe if he'd just been appointed to start with, they might have stayed up. They probably would have stayed up, so it's a shame to see Plymouth go down, but it is a prediction I think most people would have got right. And then we move up. Yeah, Luton. Funny. Of course, I did revise my league table prediction from pre-season. Thank God. But I still was miles off with Luton Town. They finished 11 positions lower than where I thought. And let's be honest, who really thought they were going to get relegated? I honestly just continued to think that they'd just have enough in their squad to pull themselves clear. I never thought they'd get back into the playoffs. I never thought they'd get back into any form of promotion or playoff fight. But I thought they'd be at least in mid-table. And the fact that Luton remained down there for the entirety of the season, and despite a slight surge under Matt Bloomfield, got relegated after back-to-back relegations to League One. It is one of the most disastrous seasons we've seen from a relegated side ever. So I won't be the only one who got this one wrong. Let's just not remember back to my pre-season predictions, eh? Just surviving then, we had Hull City. I was 4 places off with them. Again, a bit like Cardiff, to be honest. They were a team who I thought would be in and around the scrap, so I wasn't too far off with this one. Of course, it could have been a lot different on the final day for Hull City, and they still look like they are in a bit of a mess and could be in and around that part of the league table next season as well. But I thought they'd be in and around the fight. They proved to be, so I'm quite happy with that one. Could say the same for Preston, just above them. They finished only 2 positions lower than where I expected, so I was quite happy with them as well. I think the teams who were fighting in and amongst the drop zone, I wasn't far off with. Preston were another. I think pre-season, there was a lot of expectation that they might drop a little bit, but never really be in all that much relegation trouble. However, in the end, they could have gone down if the season had gone on for a few more weeks. So they've maybe survived a scare there, Preston. They have to improve next season in what will be a tougher league. But yeah, quite happy with that one. And then we go above them with Derby County. I was 1 place off with them as well. I'd say, yeah, I didn't get the position right, but I think their season went how I expected it to be. They had a promising start. They slipped down, they were sort of flirting with the drop, but in the end just had enough to stay up. And that's exactly what happened in the end. Maybe the John Eustace signing was a genius move that kept them up in the end. Who knows where they would have ended up with Paul Warne, but I thought Derby would stay up. They'd just about have enough, and that proved to be the case. Then we went to Stoke City, and every season I refused to get drawn in to the idea that they are going to suddenly, finally become the playoff team we all think they could be, should be. I don't even know at this point, but let's be fair, Stoke City consistently finish between 16th and 20th every single season, regardless of personnel, regardless of money spent, and regardless of the manager. Even with Mark Robins, Stoke still finished in and around the same area as they always do. And I honestly don't know how Stoke fans cope. I really, really don't. What will get them at least to mid-table? I don't know at this point, but I was 2 places off with Stoke. Again, they pretty much had the same sort of season, I thought. They were always going to flirt, they were always going to have a scare, but they were always going to get safe in the end, and that's what happened. And then we've got Oxford United. Now, I did change my predictions. I did expect them to go down earlier in the season and in pre-season, as I think most people did. But I did start to believe in them, and I did gamble on them staying up in the November point when I did these predictions, and I'm glad I did, because I had them staying up just, and to be fair, they did surpass my expectations. They were 4 places higher. 17th, I think, is an outstanding finish for them. I really, really do, and I'm delighted that they've stayed up, because I've got a real soft spot for them, and I had a great FM save with them on Football Manager a few years ago. An inspired signing, bringing in Gary Rowett, when many thought the sacking of Des Buckingham was harsh. So I think they deserve a lot of credit for gambling in the manner they did, and here's hoping they can establish themselves in the league. Above them, we've got Pompey and QPR, who I will pair together simply because I had them both to go down. They were the 2 sides who I thought would go down with Plymouth, and they both massively surprised me, and they've both done incredibly well. You know, QPR went on a mad run, looked like they might get themselves into a playoff fight at one stage, but then sunk back towards mid-table. And Pompey, another team I really like, delighted they stuck with John Messino. They never panicked, and Fratton Park became the place we all expected it to be, and it became a fortress in the end. And it was that home form that was the platform to keeping them up. Another club I'm delighted have stayed at this level, and I hope do for years to come, in Pompey. And QPR, well, they've took a step forward from being a relegation-threatened team to one who's in mid-table, so let's see if they'll keep building. Above them, and I'll pair these 2 together as well, we had Norwich and Watford, who underachieved compared to where I thought they'd be. Now, I didn't think either would be in the playoffs. Watford and Norwich have both dropped significantly from where I expected them to be. I thought they would be in the chasing pack, but they wouldn't actually get themselves into the top 6. So I'm not too bothered that I was a little bit far off with this prediction. I think it's safe to say both have just underachieved, and that's maybe why Tom Cleverley's been sacked. You could say the same for Hostorup. I think they are 2 teams who should always be in the playoff conversation, and last year dropped in to mid-table mediocrity, which is massively disappointing for the pair of them. And I'll pair the next 2 as well, because they both rose equally in the end. I did have them both to be mid-table, so I'm quite happy with my predictions, albeit Swansea and Sheffield Wednesday did finish higher than what I expected. They were both still in mid-table, and credit to them that they're higher than I thought, and maybe, if a few weeks of the season was left, could have maybe pushed for playoffs, but I thought Sheff Wed would take the necessary step forward that they would under Danny Roll, and that was mid-table. I know there was a lot of excitement pre-season that they maybe would push for playoffs after they had a very busy transfer window, but I always thought a steady step into mid-table would be good for them, and it's good they've made that step. However, looking ahead to the future, with Danny Roll maybe leaving, all the stuff that goes on with Chansiri, I hope they don't take another step backwards, but yeah, they finished where I expected them to, and the same for Swansea. I never really expected anything dramatic from Swansea City. I never expected them to challenge the top 6. I never expected them to be in trouble, albeit it did look like under their previous manager it could have gotten a little bit sketchy. So credit to them for making the change, and credit to them for finishing in the middle of the table. In 10th, and I thought I was done talking about them. Yes, Boro have massively underachieved and disappointed, and I am going to keep this short and sweet. 7 positions lower than where I thought. I believed we'd get top 6. I believed we and Sunderland would be the 2 who would push for the top of the playoff places, and maybe, have the top 2 looking over their shoulders, and my God, was I an idiot. And never again will I overestimate Boro's squad and over-expect from this club, because I should know after supporting them for 20 years of my life that they will inevitably let me down, as to which they have done again. A 10th place finish for Boro, not been in the playoffs, disastrous as you all know, especially finishing below clubs who I will get to over the next couple of places, who changed their managers, had relative instability, some even protested against their owners, and in one of the weakest playoff races in recent memory, Boro still managed to finish at the bottom of it, which, a massively disappointing season to which, if we're to make steps forward, changes need to be made. And above us we had West Brom, another side who I thought would finish in the playoffs, who maybe equally as much as Boro should be disappointed. And especially after the season they started like a house on fire, did West Brom, and I thought they'd be another side who could maybe keep the top two on their toes. As it happened, they fell away and just never had the consistency to get back in there. 4 positions lower than where I thought, to a bitterly disappointing season for West Brom. They'll be hoping to get back into the playoff pack next season. And in 8th we have Millwall, and I was only 1 position off, and I'm quite happy about this because I think Millwall are an easy side to underestimate, but I didn't underestimate them, and I had a feeling they would again, as they unfortunately often do for a Millwall fan. They get close to playoffs, they flirt, they tease, but they never quite make it, and in the end they always just fall short. It happens so often with Millwall, but even then, as disappointing as I'm sure it is, they should be more than proud that their team continues to challenge for the playoffs with the budget that they have, and they did it again this season. Alex Neil did a fantastic job, so although I didn't get the position bang on, I'm really glad that I stayed confident and backed Millwall, because they finished exactly where I thought they would. In 7th, overachieving, is Blackburn Rovers, 5 positions higher than where I thought they'd be. I felt like I was nailed on at one stage when Ishmael come in and they had a disastrous start and it looked like they were in free fall. But then a resurgence towards the end of the season absolutely dragged Blackburn right into the playoff pack. So I wouldn't say I was that far off up until the very end, to which Blackburn then had a massive spurt in form. So, they finished a lot more higher than I expected them to. In the end, I think given all the off-field issues, they did really, really well. And it'll be interesting to see if Ishmael can build on that next season. Similarly, in 6th, we have Bristol City, who are 4 places higher than where I predicted. And a bit like Blackburn, really. I thought Bristol City would be up there, just fall short, as they kind of do in that 6th to 10th bracket. But fair play to Liam Manning. He dragged that Bristol City side. He maximised what he had, and he got them into playoffs. And they were just very consistent towards the end of the season. Their home form was spot on, and they got themselves into the top 6. It's a shame how it went against Sheffield United, and it looks like Liam Manning might be moving on, which I am gutted, from a Bristol City persuasion. That would be a very gut-wrenching loss for them as a football club. So who knows where they'll go if that does happen and he does leave for Norwich City. But still, getting them into the playoffs is a fantastic achievement, and they certainly overachieved for me. And then in 5th, I'll hold my hands up, Coventry City. I didn't expect them to finish where they did. 8 places high they finished in the end. Possibly the biggest, apart from Luton, the biggest gap that I had. They had a fantastic second half of the season. I didn't see them getting playoffs. They were that far away. And of course, maybe just after I did my previous prediction, they brought in Frank Lampard and then won, 9 of 10 games? And absolutely propelled themselves into the top 6. So fair play to them for not only having that initial manager bounce, but when things got a little bit sketchy, they still got themselves over the line in the end. And as I say, maybe on another day, they might have beat Sunderland in the playoff semis, and it might be Coventry in the Premier League at this moment in time. But they've got something good, I believe, with Frank Lampard. And here's hoping for them next season. If they are to get playoffs again, they don't make the job so difficult. In 4th, we have Sunderland. And I'm delighted to say, for the first time, I was right. This is the first position, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not, actually, that this is the first time I've been correct in terms of the position. But I did put Sunderland 4th. They did finish 4th. I just thought they were going to be the best of the rest in terms of the top 3. Of course, I had Boro up there. Stupid me. But I just had confidence that I'd saw enough from Sunderland to suggest that they would remain comfortably in the playoffs. They were never going to quite get into the top 2. I always felt like they'd fall just short. But I felt like they'd have enough to stay comfortably in that position. A bit like what West Brom did the season before. And that's exactly what turned out to be true. I can't remember if I nailed my flag to the mast and predicted them to win the playoffs. I don't even think I predicted a playoff winner, but still, I predicted them to finish 4th. They did, and I'm pretty delighted with that. In 3rd, though, we have Sheffield United, who did fall short. I had them in the top 2, and they just fell short. Now, this could have gone either way. Up until the final 3 or 4 weeks of the season, I thought Sheffield United, even if you'd have asked me up until February, I thought they were a shoo-in to get themselves into the top 2, and I felt confident that my top 2 prediction was going to come off, but they dropped points at a crucial time, and Burnley were just solid. They did not let off, and Sheffield United fell. And it's harsh because they were clearly the 3 best teams in the league by a mile. One of them was always going to fall agonisingly short. Unfortunately for the Blades, it was them. So only 1 position off in the end. But of course, it is a big difference between automatic promotion and where they are now, which are playoff losers and spending another season in the Championship. In second, I have Burnley, and I am not afraid to admit I was wrong. I just had a feeling with Scott Parker and their lack of attack that maybe they were relying too heavily on the defence and they would just drop a little bit, but still cling on to a top 6 spot. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Clarets. You were brilliant. You went on a record-breaking unbeaten run and just continued to set the most stupid standard of defending in the league. And for that reason, 100 points, I'll hold my hands up and say, I was wrong. You deserve it. You were great. And when I thought they'd maybe fall into the playoff pack, the top 3 were clear by an absolute mile, and Burnley were by far, in the end, the second best side with 100 points. So I'm afraid to say I was wrong on that one. But to finish on a high, I did predict the title winners to be the title winners. I was a bit worried when they started having their annual Leeds wobble that they might be about to throw it away again, but I did always feel like Leeds, and this is even going as far back as pre-season, although I don't want to touch them predictions again. From pre-season, I always felt like Leeds would be in the top 2, and I think from September onwards, I had them as my champions, and they proved to be the case. You looked at their numbers. They had by far the best attack, they created the most chances, they even had a better XG against than Burnley, but just happened to concede more because they had a pretty bad goalkeeper for 90% of the season, but they still had enough elsewhere to get themselves over the line. I think it was clear to see that Leeds were the best team in the league. My prediction said so, as did the table in the end. Leeds were rightfully champions of the Championship. So then a quick look on screen at a differential, a little look at which teams I was closest with to which teams I was the furthest off, and it's safe to say you can see at either side of the spectrum I massively underachieved or underestimated Coventry and overestimated Luton Town. They were the 2 biggest outliers for me. It's quite crazy to think that they were pretty close together when I did my last prediction, and one went that way and the other went that way. Of course, when it comes to your own club, you always slightly overestimate because you're ever the optimist and you want your own club to do well, so Boro are always going to be down there. But yeah, other than that, I don't think I did too bad. I guess I'll hold my hands up with QPR and Pompey, and maybe Blackburn too, but again, up until the end of the season, I wasn't too far off with them. I will apologise to Burnley fans, I guess, as well, but everywhere else, I would say the teams were in and around where I thought they would be, especially down towards that sort of, bottom half of the league to the relegation zone. I think I was pretty okay with most of them, just in the wrong order. And a lot of the playoff chasers, I think, were in and around where I thought they would be too. So even though I only got 2 teams bang on, I'm not too miffed with that. I think I did okay in the end. And of course, we will be doing exactly the same once pre-season starts in July, when I'll probably embarrass myself all over again. So guys, let me know your thoughts on the video in the comment section below, and feel free to take the piss out of my predictions and how far off I was with your team in the comment section below. But until then, like the video if you've enjoyed it, subscribe for more. We will be back to look ahead to the next season of the Championship. I will be dropping my early season predictions. Yes, we're not going to be waiting until July. I am going to be dropping my first thoughts on what I think will happen next season in the next few days. So subscribe for all that good stuff if you're excited. But until then, do take care, guys. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.